I'm very happy that today our university has a very special guest, Professor Saskia Sassen, professor at Columbia University and at London School of Economics. Just for those who are not familiar with works of Saskia Sassen, I would like to say that she is well known for her studies in the fields of globalization, walled cities, and field of social justice, and many, many other fields. She is an author of several books, and these books have been translated into more than 20 languages. And we are going, our university, to translate two of them. Those are Expulsions and Cities in a World Economy. So, Saskia, I would like to say thank you very much for your time. I like very much this expression of Brian Eno, who said that it is first time that we have actually declared war on another organism, you know? Yeah.
That's very good.
Yeah, but despite of this strange situation, perhaps that is the best time to rethink what has happened to our world in the recent decades.
Well, I think that it's an invitation for us to rethink not everything, but enough conditions and sort of modus operandi that we have to make a difference. I am quite struck by a desire of many people. Now, this is here in London where I am and in New York. They want to reconnect with old friends. They want to make new friends. There is a real sense of the need to connect, but in a way that is not extractive, like that person can help me with something I need, but in a way that is just about people, you know, just about us. And I find that sort of interesting. Now, I have, of course, lived in cities, New York and London, where you have an extraordinary amount of energy going into making it. Making a great career, writing the best book, you know, all of that. And that somehow is now, it's sort of at a lower level of importance because there are other things that clearly matter more. Now, my big concern is how long will this last? Will it last 20 minutes, 2 days? You know, this new spirit, this new sense of connectivity that we need each other, etc. And so I come out with some notions, you know, that it probably won't last very long. I tend to say that everything is a curve. You know, it grows, it stays stable, and then poof, it's gone. And so I worry that might also be what we're headed to here, you know, that we go back to our old modes, because this is not the first time we have been in this type of crisis. We have had these crises, and we forget. But I find the most extraordinary bit of info that comes out of the bit of information is how we forget. We forget the intensity of prior crisis. We know the fact. When it comes to facts, we're very good. But recollecting the experience of a condition, that's much more difficult for us humans.
For me, this virus shows that inequality should be reduced, that existing system does not work properly because we have so many problems. Countries like USA, like UK, like Spain, Italy, all countries, they all have this problem, huge problems, yes. And I think that if inequality and social justice will be improved, I think for next crisis, we will be more prepared. What do you think about it?
Okay, let me answer the part right before what you were saying now, you know, what it means for the future. I just would like to comment on what I'm experiencing about this current moment, which is, and I don't want to take the romantic and hopeful element. That comes, that I will do that too, but I want to start with the facticity of it. Facts on the ground. And that is that given the constraints that this virus has imposed on us, invisible as it is, without smell, without any visual element, that to me is an extraordinary type of power. And it immediately invites me to think, what are other powers such as those which are invisible but powerful that make a difference, that may have to do with the economy, that have to do with inequality, that have to do with racisms? We're all aware of those elements that I just mentioned, but what are we not aware of? So what this virus does for me is not so much terrify me as virus, but it's an invitation, because because of its invisibility, yet its strong presence. It sort of becomes an invitation to think, what else like that, strong, present, but invisible? Because that's the thing. This virus is not like a fly that you see and that can bite you. It's invisible. I mean, it's magnificent, you know, that is power. And so my question then becomes, what are the other instantiations of invisibility, invisible power that we are continuously living with, but that we do not engage with? We are sufficiently engaged with this virus that I don't worry about that part. What worries me is the extent to which we are not engaged or sufficiently engaged with all the other factors, many of which are of our making. We made them, you know, and so we have made injustice, we have made inequality, we have made concentrations of wealth, we have made the destructions of all kinds of water bodies. We have made. And that is like, okay, yeah, that's sort of, no, that is what we should be confronting rather than this virus. This virus eventually will go away, and then it will come back in 30 years or in 25 or in 5. I don't know that. But the big story here is not so much the virus for me as what the virus tells us about what we are totally obsessed with and what we leave and forget and what we should be working at and obsessed with. You know, did I make myself clear?
Yeah. In your book, Expulsions, the last part, Dead Land, Dead Water. Yeah.
I love that title.
Yeah, me too.
No commas. You probably didn't notice, but I was so proud of that. Dead land, dead water. No commas.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said that last 30 years, we humans, unfortunately, have won the war for destruction. Yes. And this coronavirus, does it make easier to do some positive changes in terms of this climate change?
You know, I think that might be the case, but just for about 25 minutes. You know what I mean? And after that, we very easily, with great comfort, forget about it, and including the elites. And just, you know, it's in many ways, we experience it as a major interruption and eruption, you know, interruption of our lives, eruption into a domain, you know. But that's the drama that we humans are very good at experiencing when it's happening right there and you can't believe that it is happening, even if you can't see it or you can't touch it or you can't smell it, right? But I think our inclination, and it must be a survival, an elementary survival mechanism, is to then, we just leave it aside and we move on, because this is not good. This is a curve, right? It's now at its extreme, and then it starts to diminish, hey, and then we forget it. You know, we don't think about it anymore. So I'm afraid that it is again one of those. Now, then I stand back and I ask myself, we humans are ultimately fragile. Our bodies are fragile compared to some other, live entities, compared to a tree, compared to a strong water body, compared to some of the animals that could kill us, we are fragile. So on some level, we have had to use other instruments to survive, right? And that means intelligence, all your beautiful books, just all of those things that mark our difference from other live entities, live animals, live whatever. And so I think we have in our DNA somewhere, I am not an expert on DNA, but the image, we have a capacity to look at the world through our eyes, to know what we need and to know what can hurt us or destroy us. And that keeps us sufficiently busy that we don't really take it much farther. Now, every time we have a crisis like this, it's not the first time, right? We had the earlier SARS and all of that. It sort of becomes a bit of an invitation to say, okay, we're not alone here in this world. We have other actors. They may be invisible, they may be tiny, tiny. They're strong, they can kill us. That means something, And so that is embedded probably in our DNA somewhere, that there are some actors that can destroy us. And then when the crisis is over, since we have killed so much, we have built, covered with cement, all kinds of live stuff, then we just go back to daily life and not much has changed. And so I think when you look at where does the energy to really transform something, and here I'm thinking of the environmental question. Well, it comes from the new generations because they have experienced a change and they take it simply more seriously, and they're young, they have a future ahead of them. We elders do not. So maybe that's also some sort of preservation thing, that we're old enough, we don't need to worry about that, so let's just enjoy life and let's keep destroying Mother Nature. And so it really, I think that this event is a signal that the young generations will be far better at using and acting on than we, the elders. Now, you are not an elder, you're young.
I'm elder as well.
You know what I mean? I mean that because I see it in my grandson, my son, even my son who is not that young. It's just a different mode. They inhabit the world with a few different modes. And then a lot of it is the same, but a few sufficiently they're present that they see it differently. I mean, that's sort of that's how I think of it.
So your optimism is coming from young generation, yes?
Well, I am basically, I'm an optimist, so I have that also. But I think that we were already better, our generation, you and me, we were already better than our parents in many ways. There are always differences, but when you think of the American culture, the current elders, I, are better than what some of those earlier parents did, and brought in. We contested some of that. We now have new generations. My son, my grandchildren, they are more radical. They're more engaged with Mother Nature, etc. So this is something. Now, what I cannot tell is how far it will go, because in my reading, as I said, everything is kind of a curve. So the curve may be a bit higher, but then eventually one falls partly at least in the familiar. One regresses a bit, but then the next generation comes and takes it, a bit higher, and also regresses, but at a better level, at a higher level. I don't know if I explained myself, but that's sort of
no, it's clear. Yeah. It's clear. To be honest, young generation has to know, yes, about these issues. What kind of problems could this climate change bring? Yeah. And at this case, I would like to express my concern that in university system, I'm talking now about the Georgian system, but I'm sure that this kind of problems are everywhere, because this education today is so commercialized that mostly it is financed by these big corporations and financial firms. They are trying to somehow avoid these problems and not to present to this new generation. And maybe it's a smaller problem in USA, but here it's a problem, you know, not only with the climate change, but for other things as well. So,
but here too, here in the United States, I mean, the United States is pretty bad. You know, if you compare with Europe, most European countries have young generations that are far more engaged by all of this, and also older generations. So when I say the young, I don't mean that the new generation in the United States, that all of them are going to be more engaged by this. No, I don't. I don't believe that. But at least more. It's just on the, it seems like it's on the agenda of our epoch. I see that when I teach, and I teach this one class that I have is rather big lecture class with undergraduates, and they always come up, you know, they're far more engaged by the question, you know this, of the environment and what we're doing, you know, that's the simplest way of describing it. Then say my colleagues, we rarely talk about the environment. When I'm with my colleagues, I never talk about the environment. The students are the ones that bring it up in the classes very often, you know. So it's just, and we were different from our parents. You know, our parents wanted the biggest car possible. This is in America now, the biggest whatever. We don't want a car. A car is a hassle. So we are already, you know, and so it moves on. But now I also think that there are countries, like European countries mostly, have just been so much more reasonable, not perfect, you know, not the ideal or whatever, but they have been so much better about the environmental question. And because there's less land. In a country like the United States, you have endless stretches of empty land. So land is sitting there and you say, well, do we need more? Do we need, whereas in Europe, protecting green space is a must, you know. In the United States is particularly brutal. It's like Brazil, brutal. It's just brutal. There is no real sense, you know, of a history, an environmental history, a history of land, a history of water, a history, you know. And so it's pretty big. I think Europeans generally are far more sensitive and recognize the importance of water, of protection, of keeping green. In the United States, numbers of trees that were cut down because they wanted to build a few houses, and they just destroy old trees, put 2 or 3 little houses. I mean, stuff like that, you know, you stand back and you say, wow.
Saskia, you said that after 25 minutes, yes, as you say, everybody will forget these problems what we have now. Yes. Yeah. And I listened to an interview with Slavoj Žižek, and they discussed the same issue. And he said that after this crisis, we will not have the same situation, and the normal situation will not be as the ruling class says, that after a few months everything will be okay and we will come back to a normal situation. So do you think that everything will stay the same and there will not be some changes?
Listen, most conditions will stay the same. The streets will be there, the asphalt will be there, the big towers will be there, the buses will be there, you know, I mean, that. But something that is partly invisible will now be present, and it's only partly invisible. The other question, what is visible, is land, water, air. And they make, I don't know, this is a strange way of putting it, they make presence. Land, water, and air become present to our imaginaries in a way that perhaps they were not, you know, before this crisis. This will be the most intense moment of recognizing that presence of air, water, land. But still, it will remain there. It will leave a trace. Every major crisis has generated a kind of micro history, micro condition, not macro, but really micro, that carries on, you know, that not everybody forgets. There will always be some who will remember and who will tell stories about it. You know, that kind of a thing. This is how we humans have actually made long histories, you know, in our continents, etc., that there is a trace, there is a connection, there is a remembrance. We often speak about the United States as this country that comes out of nowhere suddenly, so to speak, you know, and that barely has a history. But most parts of the world are not that way. They have long histories, you know, and certainly certain continents like Europe, you know, where you have so little land, there is a lot of memory of. So, but, you know, I just wonder that it might just be a survival mechanism, that we can't remember the full drama of, say, being sequestered, you know, now for about 2 weeks or something, that we're not meant to, you know. We will remember it, but it will be a remote, we will not have the experience that we have now. I mean, we happen to be very lucky because we are surrounded, we are also encased here, you know, a bit, but we are surrounded by trees, and we have a terrace that goes on. And so we see trees, you know, etc. But for most people, it will be a bit harsher. They will not be surrounded by trees. We are here on the 5th floor, but surrounded by trees. They're little trees, but they're trees. Well, that of course already creates, you know, but it is also an invitation. How important trees are. We should have trees in our life, you know, that kind of a thing. But I do think that everything is a curve. So indifference, bare recognition, full awareness, oh my God, what hell is this? And then we are on the other side of the curve.
Yeah. In 1950s, there was an epidemic of polio, yes?
Yes.
Jonas Salk created this vaccine, and he refused to do patent, and it made the vaccine available for everyone. So do you think the same will be today, and vaccine will be available for everyone? It will be not, the price will not be high, and so.
On the pricing end, I doubt it, because we have entered a new epoch where everything has a price, and that knowledge alone, everything has a price, can already alter all kinds of elements, including seeing hungry middle-class people who don't have money, have lost whatever, and you're not about to give them money to buy bread. You know, it's an egoism that is stunning, but I think that's what it is. So I think that it has made a difference, but it's really not enough. My question that I have in my head is, what would it take for us to collectivize more? Now, we know that like 20 or 30 years ago, I remember I was at the University of Chicago, that you began to see young generations, young people mobilizing around issues of poverty in a rich city, in this case, the city of Chicago. And so they wanted to help poor people. That was like a very strong movement of a lot of these, you know, and I was at the University of Chicago, which is one of the grand universities. So it's a very expensive, it's a private university. So these were students who came from good families, you know, from family middle class or more, or high class families. And they were so keen on helping poor neighborhoods to set up, say, little gardens where they could grow food, not flowers, but food, you know, food for eating. I don't see that happening as much anymore now in the last 10 years. When I was in New York and I'm in London, I just don't see that happening. I know that it is happening, but it's not like it exploded, that people said, okay, we need to confront the fact that there are people who are hungry. And some of those people are my age, they are younger, they are older, whatever. I just don't see that. I think that there is, I think at some point there must have been in the minds of many young people, at least in the United States, a true sense of failure. People who were a bit idealists, who wanted a better world, and then it just didn't happen. It just got worse. We got a Trump, and the housing question has become extreme. Absolutely extreme. We have now modest middle-class people who are on the street. So from the perspective of these younger generations, they say, well, man, this is a danger zone. A country like this is a danger zone. We either make it or we sink. That I never had that fear, by the way, but I can imagine that for many young people, they see this and they say, well, I have a choice. I can be nice and be poor, and I may wound up when I'm 35 without housing, or I'm just going to pretend that all of that doesn't happen. I'm going to be brutal and I'm going to try to make money. I can imagine that kind of logic emerges out of these conditions. It's not that these kids are worse or more selfish. It's that they're terrified. They're afraid. There is fear. There is fear. If I don't do it right, because we know that middle-class people with high education, are now homeless in the United States. It's not battalions of them, but they are really, many of the homeless, they're either drunks and very old and die, or they are generation, including younger people and middle-aged people who actually have education, once had jobs, and now are out. And the housing question is one of the key effective elements for them being expelled, because the price of housing is so high, because we haven't built enough housing, because there is not money to be made by building modest housing. It's a combination of elements that has really had as an outcome something that is far more brutal than we could have foreseen. Now, this is the United States I'm talking about. I'm talking about its big cities, especially New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles. It's brutal. You have middle-class people. Now, just a little, just practical example. If you are in some sort of high-tech setup, you are 25 years old or something like that. You make $150,000 and you are in Silicon Valley. You sleep in your car. You can't afford. You either have a car or you have some. But you need a car to get around. But we know of all kinds of people who are employed in good firms who make $150,000. They cannot afford to get housing. This is in Silicon Valley, which is an extreme case. But I'm sure that we have some of that emerging in New York, in Chicago, in any of the big fancy cities, where you have now a growing majority of very high-income people who want 5 rooms in their house, where before there were 2 rooms, a sitting room and a bedroom. And so they gather more and more space, very fancy setups, and they are expelling the modest middle classes. Lawyers, accountants, but the modest kind, people with education, people who expected, we really, now, New York, maybe, and LA, maybe completely extreme cases, but they tell a tale. That is sort of one way of putting it. This is really almost unbelievable what is happening in this country. You follow what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
We're talking people with degrees, people who have jobs, and the housing question. I don't know if you saw the film Push.
I have not seen Push, but read some articles about this film, and I try to follow this Leilani Farha.
Yeah, she's good. Leila Farah. Yeah.
Farha, yeah.
Yeah.
You would like to say something about this movie, this Pusher?
Oh, well, I mean, it's about the housing question.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
And so it has, it has been shown across the world because people are understanding that the housing question is not their fault, that there is a third actor. There is the person who needs the housing, those who have the housing, and then there is an intermediary actor who is reorganizing the housing question. And those are, as we know, one of the biggest actors there comes from the financial sector. Of course, the financial sector is algorithmic math, where you can transform anything. Algorithmic math is an open system. It's not a closed system. That makes a radical difference with traditional mode of housing, where a house is a house and the cost of the house is the cost of the house. This is very different now because there is a third actor, very powerful, who can also play in there and, sort of unsettle. So the film is, I think, very important because the film makes it visible and people can understand it.
I have read an article a few days ago of Leilani Farha. She wrote there that for big landlords, the tenants are not clients. For them, the investor is client. Exactly. So they don't care about the tenants.
Exactly. That is a very good way.
They care about just for investors,
But that's exactly what it is. It's not about people, It's not. And you can, and this is what I call this third actor enters the picture, And we see this in many sectors. The housing question is just one of those issues that it's visibility also, it's after all housing. But this is happening in many things. So the people who sell us all kinds of food, well, there is an intermediary, which is the one that really makes the money. It's not even, in the end, the shops where we go and buy. It is that intermediary that makes most of the money. And on the other side of the intermediary are the ones who are growing the food, in various parts of the world. I mean, I have long written about this, that intermediation in our economy is really what makes the big difference compared to an earlier format. And intermediation, really enters the picture in the last 20 years, 30 years. This is not new. It really, in one book that I wrote, I argue that already in the 1980s, we begin to see this third actor who never loses. It's an in-between actor, and the other parties, the real elements might lose, but that intermediate, because they just intermediate, they raise something, extract something, and then it's quite remarkable, it's quite remarkable.
Yeah. I started to wrote an article, and I wrote about the fragment of a movie where there is a dinner in an Upper East Side,
right.
And there is a dinner in a publisher's house. It's very, fancy house with luxury, etc., etc. And one of guests asks him that why he stopped writing and became this publisher. And he answers that if he were writer, he won't be in this apartments in the Upper East Side. He will be somewhere in a different place. And the same conclusion that people who are selling the books, they receive more money than these authors of these books, those books, it's a strange,
But that
exactly the same what you say, this
intermediation.
Yeah.
Intermediation, they can't lose. The both sides, but then you get this, in between sector, and yeah, it's quite something. And I have specialized especially and sort of examined especially how that intermediate sector works for high finance, for very powerful actors. Huh? But it actually works at many levels. It also works at more modest levels. So before, the farmer used to sell the milk directly to, and now, no, now there is an intermediary. You know? And of course, one outcome of that is that sometimes we are importing, say, potatoes from, I don't know, from Australia, because, or I love it. For a while I was tracking, what was it? Germany was selling potatoes to England. And guess what? England was selling potatoes to Germany. Why? Because there is an intermediary they don't care about, you know, they just want the trade. And that is another, I mean, it's unbelievable that many people simply are not aware of that. They wonder, why are things so expensive? You know, we all are experiencing for the last 20 years, really, that the prices have gone up. Well, it's not the farmers necessarily, huh? It's that intermediate sector. And that makes me very angry, I must say. You know,
yeah.
I can manage it. I have a good salary. I think of how many people are eating very poor food because they cannot, in other words, unhealthy food, because they can't afford good fruit, etc., because everything is ridiculously expensive. So it's at so many levels. And that then brings to me that this dominant category is an extractive mode. You don't build up, you extract, you know, that the system is geared towards extracting. And we know, like the milk growers, growing milk is hard work. They have to get up, you know, at 5 in the morning. They have to keep the cows healthy. I don't know what all. And in the end, they're barely making money. They keep doing it because that's what they have. That's what they have invested in. But their incomes, it's not like they're becoming rich. Of course, big corporates can buy all kinds of farms and make money because they become the intermediate, but they buy the whole farm as well. So it's a very problematic moment. And in my reading, no system of power, if we think of this as a system that is not just an economic system, but also a system of power, has lasted forever. Neither will this. And we see already, I would say, in the new generations, new modalities, you know, especially in Europe, you see it. They don't want a car. They care more about Mother Nature. That's already very important. They want to eat well. You know, so something, ça bouge, as the French would say. It moves. There is a bit of movement.
Yeah. To continue what you say about this medium, I think that there is also the problem of this distribution of this wealth. Yes, the coronavirus show us that these low-wage workers, yes, they're so necessary.
Yeah.
They can't stay at home during this period like other people. They have to go and serve us because you can't stop just collecting the garbage. Supermarket workers, they have to work because we have to buy some food, yes.
So do the nurses.
Yeah, nurses, of course, they're so important in nowadays, but they receive so little salaries.
Yeah.
It's
nurses also, they are absolutely underpaid, the nurses.
Yeah.
But especially, I know what you're saying, there is a stratum of workers that are so necessary and they are truly poor. And they are made poor by these extractive logics, you know, that dominate. Every firm takes pride in, we got them to, you know, earn less, to pay less.
Yeah. And a few weeks ago there was, I think, all over the world that people from homes, from houses, they upload these workers for their job. And maybe it will be the turn point.
Yes.
And we understand that the wealth should be distributed more, say, fairly, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that we have learned something. This crisis has made visible something. And one thing is the importance of nurses and how hard they have to work and how little they make. It's a scandal. I mean, to me, it is, I don't know what it is like in your country, but in the UK and in the United States, it's scandalous how low their wages are, how hard their work is, the risks that they take. And they're dying, they're dying because of the virus, because it's almost impossible. And then when these hospitals have not bought enough proper masks, and they tell the nurses, you have to reuse your mask at least for 5 days. What is that? Because you know what? Part of the story, it's not that the people who say that are the baddies, the bad guys. The bad guys are the big corporations that also own part of a hospital or of it. And they want, hey, what they all can do is, hey, some earning. You know, I mean, it really is. But I have the impression, and I hope I got that part right, that more and more people are discovering this whole notion of what I call the intermediary, right? And that at the top there is, they don't lose. So, you know, it really is problematic.
Saskia, I just want to say to you, and then we will finish, that I'm very grateful. And I think that if young generation as well as old generation will listen to people like you, maybe this turn point for a better life will come closer.
Yes, I hope.
closer.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure. Yeah, stay in touch. Stay in touch. Absolutely. I really enjoyed talking with you. Yes.
Oh, thank you very much.